The early morning mist swirled around the cobblestone streets of Valladolid, Spain. It was July 1519, and the city was abuzz with rumors. Pope Leo X, the powerful ruler of the Catholic Church, had just issued a series of commands that shook the very foundations of the kingdom. He ordered the powers of the Inquisition to be reduced, revoking the special privileges that had been granted by his predecessor. The Inquisition, a fearsome institution that had terrified the Spanish people for decades, was now threatened with losing its grip on the nation. Charles V, the young and ambitious King of Spain, was not about to let this happen. He and his officials refused to allow the Pope's commands to be published in Spain. They sent a firm protest to Rome, and the Pope, caught between a rock and a hard place, suspended the briefs without revoking them. This move only deepened the tension. In Aragon, the people immediately stopped paying their grants to the crown. The kingdom was on the brink of chaos. Finally, in December 1520, the Pope confirmed an earlier accord, but the terms were ambiguous, leaving room for further conflict. Cardinal Adrian, a trusted advisor, accepted the Aragonese version for the time being, and the political prisoner Juan Prat was released. However, the Inquisition never acknowledged the validity of these accords, rendering the struggles of the past years in vain. The Castilian courts, the assembly of the kingdom's representatives, met in La Coruna in 1520. They repeated their demands for reform in the Inquisition's procedures, but their efforts were met with the same resistance. Later that year, while Charles was away in Flanders, a new plan for reform was presented to him, but it too failed. When the king returned to Spain, he convened the courts in Valladolid in 1523. Once again, the old demands for reform resurfaced, including the request that inquisitors' salaries be paid by the crown rather than through confiscation. Despite their persistence, the attempts were fruitless. The courts that met in Toledo in 1525 complained about the abuses committed by inquisitors and their familiars, but they only received a promise that wrongs would be righted if they truly existed. In 1526, at the courts in Granada, a memorial was presented to the king, highlighting the flaws in the Inquisition's secret procedures and requesting that prisoners be held in public jails instead of hidden cells. The king's response, if any, was never recorded. These repeated failures to reform the Inquisition revealed a persistent stream of opposition, but it was up against a stubborn king. Charles V, in a letter to a correspondent in 1520, observed that the Holy Office was being criticized and attacked in the courts of Aragon and Catalonia. However, criticism was not limited to these regions. It was widespread throughout Spain. From 1519 to 1521, Castile was consumed by the revolt of the Comuneros, a complex struggle involving town oligarchies, the nobility, and rival factions. Conversos, or converted Jews, played a role in the rebellion, leading to rumors and accusations that they were the driving force behind the uprising. The Constable of Castile informed Charles V that the root cause of the uprising was the Conversos, and after the rebels' defeat at Villalar in 1521, a jester claimed that many dead were found without foreskin. These claims, though malicious, reflected the deep-seated tensions in Spanish society. While some comuneros hoped to modify or abolish the Inquisition, the junta that led the rebellion was careful not to offend the Holy Office. The Inquisition survived this critical period, with its functions intact. In Valencia, where a parallel revolt was taking place, the Inquisition's role was even strengthened as the rebels imposed compulsory mass baptisms on some of the Muslim population. After the Comunidades, objections to the Inquisition continued in both Castile and Aragon. A notable example is the memorial presented to Charles at the Aragonese courts in Monzon in 1533. It contained 16 articles, including complaints about inquisitors overstepping their bounds, engaging in secular business, and extending their jurisdiction to non-heretical matters. The Inquisitor General Alonso Manrique firmly rejected these complaints, and the protests were shelved. Over time, the Inquisition's position became more secure. The old Christian majority, who had tolerated the Inquisition's activities against conversos, later attempted to curb its power when it seemed to be working against them. By the mid-16th century, the Inquisition had become an essential institution for maintaining the established religion. The unswerving support of the crown, particularly Charles V, ensured its survival. The king was dedicated to the Inquisition and introduced a similar tribunal in the Netherlands in 1520. During the Communidades, Charles exhorted his viceroys to resist any attack on the Inquisition. The monarchy now had a unique institution at its disposal, ready to be called upon in case of need. However, the Inquisition's powers were always limited by conflicts with other royal authorities and tribunals. In the Crown of Aragon, some of its activities were seen as unconstitutional, but in Castile, the Inquisition was never used to increase royal power. The Inquisition's impact varied across Spain. In the south of Castile, where it was restricted to a few big towns, it had little contact with the countryside and faced minimal opposition from urban centers. In the north and other parts of the peninsula, support was more tenuous. Converso elites remained potent enemies, particularly in Aragon. Local elites resented the Inquisition's special privileges and often saw it as a foreign and alien institution. The Inquisition's role as a policing body made it a feared institution, but it also earned some popularity by targeting minorities. Its anti-Morisco activities, for instance, may have won it some favor among Christians. However, in regions like Catalonia, the Inquisition was never fully accepted and was often viewed with suspicion and hostility. The ordinary people of Spain rarely came into contact with the Inquisition and generally accepted its presence without much protest. Significant riots against it were usually a side effect of political disturbances. The inquisitors often claimed that the people supported them, and they were not entirely wrong. However, the Inquisition's power was limited, and it did not have the extensive bureaucracy, reliable informers, or regular income needed to become a true tyranny. The Inquisition fulfilled a unique role in Spanish society, acting as a guardian against foreign ideas, a keeper of public morality, and an arbiter in small disputes. Over long periods, it was inactive in many regions and almost disappeared. It never had the omnipotent reach that some claim, and its impact on daily life was often minimal. Despite its fearsome reputation, the Inquisition was brought into existence by a particular social situation, the converso question that counted on substantial popular support in some areas. It slipped into the stream of daily life, where its presence would be felt for centuries to come. In the early 1500s, Spain was a place of great change and excitement. Educated Spaniards, like Antonio de Nebrija, who returned from Italy in 1505, were eager to share the new ideas they had learned. They wanted to spread knowledge and learning across the country. Cisneros, the Archbishop of Toledo, was a key figure in this movement. He founded the University of Alcalá, hoping it would become a center for humanist studies. One of the first tasks he set for the university was to create a special edition of the Bible, called the Polyglot Bible, which had the Hebrew, Chaldean, Greek, and Latin versions printed side by side. However, not everyone was excited about these new ideas. The Polyglot Bible, though beautiful, was expensive and didn't sell well. Many scholars still had narrow views, and the humanist ideas of some didn't catch on with the majority. One of the most influential people in this period was the Dutch scholar Erasmus. He was known for his wit and his critiques of the Church. In 1517, Cisneros invited Erasmus to visit Spain, but Erasmus couldn't come. Despite this, his ideas still spread. By 1524, some Spanish intellectuals were reading and discussing his works. One of Erasmus's most popular books, the Inquisition, was translated into Spanish by Alonso Fernandez. The book became very popular, and Erasmus's ideas were discussed everywhere, from the emperor's court to the streets. But not everyone was a fan of Erasmus. Some scholars criticized his methods, and some church officials worried that his ideas were too similar to those of Martin Luther, who was causing trouble in Germany. In 1527, a conference was held in Valladolid to debate Erasmus's ideas. The conference was inconclusive, but it was seen as a victory for the humanists. Charles V, the emperor, even wrote to Erasmus, assuring him that he would be protected in Spain. Despite this, the spread of humanist ideas in Spain was limited. Only a small number of people, mostly from noble families, were truly interested in classical studies. Latin, though studied, was not spoken, and Greek was hardly known at all. The Florentine ambassador to Spain, Guicciardini, noted that Spaniards were not very interested in learning, and few knew Latin. in the late 1520s, Spain faced new challenges. A spiritual movement called the Alumbrados, or Illuminists, began to grow. These were people who believed in a mystical union with God, often through meditation and prayer. Some of the most famous Alumbrados were supported by noble families, like the Mendoza family. However, the Inquisition, worried about heresy, began to investigate these groups. In 1524, Isabel de la Cruz and Pedro Ruiz de Alcaraz were arrested, and in 1525, an edict was issued listing their beliefs, which were considered unorthodox. The Inquisition also targeted other groups, such as those led by Francisca Hernandez in Valladolid. The Inquisition's actions had a significant impact. Many people, including the preacher Francisco Ortiz, were arrested and tried. Some, like Diego de Uceda, were tortured and forced to renounce their beliefs. The Alumbrados and their supporters, many of whom were of converso origin Jews who had converted to Christianity, faced intense scrutiny. The Inquisition's crackdown on the Alumbrados had long-lasting effects. Even people like Juan de Avila, a preacher who was denounced as an Alumbrado, faced years of investigation and had his work banned. The fear of heresy and the need to maintain religious orthodoxy led to a more cautious and conservative approach to new ideas in Spain. By the mid-1530s, the excitement of the early 1500s had waned. The humanist movement, though it had its moments of success, was limited by the narrow perspectives of many scholars and the growing concerns of the Inquisition. The desire for new knowledge and the spread of Erasmus's ideas had to coexist with the strict control of the Church. Despite this, the period remains a fascinating chapter in Spain's history, showing the tension between innovation and tradition. In the early 1500s, Spain was a land of deep religious beliefs and strict rules. The Church held a lot of power, and any ideas that seemed to challenge its teachings were met with suspicion and fear. One of the biggest threats to the Church's authority came from a new movement called Lutheranism, which started in Germany and spread quickly across Europe. In Spain, the Inquisition, a powerful religious court, was on high alert for any signs of this new heresy. One of the first victims of this suspicion was a Basque priest named Juan López de Selain. He had connections to a group called the Alumbrados, who were known for their mystical beliefs. In 1528, he was arrested and in 1530, burned at the stake in Granada for being a Lutheran. This was a clear message. Any hint of Lutheranism would be punished harshly. Another notable case was that of Juan de Vergara, a respected scholar and classical expert. He had worked on the Polyglot Bible and taught at the University of Alcalá. In 1530, he was arrested and accused of heresy. After a long trial, he was forced to publicly renounce his beliefs and pay a large fine. He was then confined to a monastery, but was eventually allowed to return to society. Despite this, he remained a respected figure and died in Alcalá in 1566. Alonso de Verus, a Benedictine monk and preacher to Emperor Charles V, also faced similar charges. In 1533, he was arrested and imprisoned for 4 years. Despite his arguments that Erasmus, a famous humanist, had not been condemned as heretical, he was still forced to renounce his errors and was banned from preaching. However, Charles V intervened and had the sentence annulled, and Verus was later appointed Bishop of the Canary Islands. Juan de Valdes, a professor at Alcalá, published a book in 1529 that was heavily influenced by Luther. The Inquisition quickly attacked the book, and in 1530, Valdes fled to Italy to avoid trial. His book was banned and listed in every index of prohibited books. His friend Matteo Pascual was also suspected of heresy due to his connections with Valdes. Though he was detained, he was eventually released and later moved to Rome, where he died in 1553. The printer Miguel de Eguia, who worked at the University of Alcalá, was accused of Lutheranism and imprisoned for over 2 years. He was eventually released and absolved. However, Pedro de Lerma, a former chancellor of Alcalá University, was not as lucky. He was influenced by Erasmus and preached his ideas. In 1537, he was forced to publicly renounce his beliefs and in shame fled to Paris, where he died in 1541. Rodrigo Manrique, the son of the Inquisitor General, wrote to Louis Vives in 1533, expressing his frustration with the situation in Spain. He said that anyone with knowledge or culture was suspected of heresy, and that the study of Greek was being suppressed at Alcala. This shows how the fear of heresy was affecting even the most educated circles. Erasmus, a famous humanist, was also affected by the backlash. His last letter to Spain was written in 1533, and he died 3 years later. Although he remained respected in the Catholic world, his influence in Spain was limited to a few learned groups. Despite the Inquisition's efforts, Lutheranism did not take root in Spain. Unlike other parts of Europe, Spain had not experienced significant heresies since the early Middle Ages. The Inquisition, which was active throughout the country, helped to keep new ideas from spreading. However, this did not mean that Spain was isolated from the world. Spanish intellectuals were exposed to Lutheran ideas in foreign universities, at the emperor's court, and at international gatherings like the Council of Trent. The city of Seville, a center of international trade, was particularly vulnerable to new ideas. In 1552, the Inquisition seized 450 Bibles that had been printed abroad. Seville was also a hub for foreign printers, who could spread heretical ideas. Archbishop Fernando de Valdez, who became the Inquisitor General, was particularly harsh in his treatment of suspected heretics. He objected to the appointment of Constantino Ponce de la Fuente, a humanist and converso, as a cathedral preacher. Constantino was arrested and died in the Inquisition cells in 1558. In Seville, a group of about 120 people, including monks and nuns, were sympathetic to Protestant ideas. Some of them, like Cipriano de Valera and Cassiodoro de Rene, fled to other countries and became important figures in the European Reformation. They even translated the Bible into Spanish, which was a significant achievement. In northern Castile, another group of Protestant sympathizers formed around an Italian named Carlos de Siso. This group included influential people like Dr. Agustin Cazalla, who had been to Germany and was influenced by his brother Pedro. Their beliefs were more aligned with Protestantism, rejecting many Catholic dogmas. This group was discovered in 1557, and many of its members were arrested and punished. The Inquisition's actions in the 1550s were particularly harsh, as Fernando de Valdez tried to regain favor with the court. The repression was severe, and many people were arrested and punished for their beliefs. Despite this, the spread of Protestantism in Spain remained limited, and the Inquisition continued to play a significant role in maintaining the Church's authority. In the 16th century, Spain was a place of deep faith and strict rules. The Catholic Church held a strong grip on the lives of people, and any challenge to its teachings was seen as a threat to the very fabric of society. When news of a new kind of religion, called Lutheranism, started to spread, it caused a lot of fear and panic. This new religion, which had already split Germany, was now threatening to do the same in Spain. Charles V, the powerful emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, was deeply worried. He had worked hard to keep his lands free from heresy, but now he saw the same problem emerging in Spain. He was so concerned that he wrote a letter to his daughter, Juana, who was ruling Spain in his absence. In this letter, he instructed her to be very strict and to punish the heretics harshly. He believed that if they were not dealt with quickly and severely, the problem would only get worse. Juana and her advisors took Charles's advice to heart. They began to round up people who were suspected of being Lutheran. Many of these people were from high social backgrounds, which made the situation even more alarming. The Inquisition, a powerful religious court, was tasked with finding and punishing the heretics. They held public trials called autos de fe, where the accused were either forced to repent or, if they refused, were burned at the stake. One of the most significant of these trials took place in Valladolid on Trinity Sunday, May 21, 1559. 30 people were accused, and 14 were burned alive. Among them were Agustin Cazalla and his brother and sister. Even though some of the accused tried to save themselves by saying they were sorry, they were still punished severely. This was a clear message that the government and the church were not going to tolerate any dissent. The following October, another trial was held in Valladolid, this time with King Philip II in attendance. 30 people were accused and 12 were burned, including 4 nuns. One of the most memorable figures in this trial was Carlos de Siso. Despite initially showing signs of repentance, he ultimately stood firm in his beliefs and was burned alive. His bravery and defiance left a lasting impression on those who witnessed the event. The city of Seville was also a center of Protestant activity. The Inquisition faced a lot of resistance there, as many people supported the accused and were angry at the harsh treatment. Despite this, the Inquisition held a major trial in Seville on September 24, 1559, where 19 people were burned. Another trial followed in December 1560, where 14 more were burned. These trials were designed to show the severity of the punishment for heresy and to discourage others from following the same path. The Inquisition also went after people who had spoken against the Church, even if they were not Lutheran. For example, a priest named Sebastian Martinez was burned for posting messages that criticized the Church. In Seville, pamphlets were distributed that attacked the Inquisition, calling it the synagogue of Satan. These trials and the harsh punishments had a strong impact on the people of Spain. They were reminded of the dangers of heresy and were encouraged to be vigilant in identifying and reporting anyone who might be a Lutheran. The Inquisition became more active, and many people were caught up in the hunt for heretics, even if they had only made a casual comment or read a book that was considered suspicious. Despite the fears and the efforts of the Inquisition, the Protestant movement in Spain was never as strong as it was in other countries. After the initial wave of repression, the threat of Lutheranism began to fade. By the 1560s, the Inquisition was focusing less on Protestantism and more on other issues, like Judaism and the Moriscos Muslims who had converted to Christianity. In the end, the number of people who were executed for heresy in Spain was relatively small compared to other countries. In England, France, and the Netherlands, the religious conflicts were much bloodier. This is not to say that the repression in Spain was not severe, but it was not as widespread or as long-lasting as in some other parts of Europe. The legacy of this period was a Spain that remained firmly Catholic, with the Inquisition continuing to play a significant role in maintaining religious orthodoxy. The fear of heresy and the harsh measures taken to suppress it left a lasting mark on the country, shaping its religious and social landscape for generations to come. The story of Spain during the Reformation is a tale of fear, suspicion, and the struggle to maintain a single, unshakable faith. In the 16th century, as ideas of religious reform spread across Europe like wildfire, Spain found itself at a crossroads. While other countries embraced new ways of thinking, Spain remained largely untouched by the Protestant movement. But this wasn't just a matter of chance or natural resistance. It was the result of a complex web of actions and reaction. In some parts of Spain, the fear of heresy was so strong that it led to tragic consequences. Families worried that their loved ones might bring dishonor upon them by embracing new religious ideas. This fear sometimes turned deadly, as in the case of Juan Diaz, who was murdered in Germany for his beliefs. The Spanish government, under King Philip II, took drastic measures to keep its people from straying. Spanish diplomats were instructed to keep an eye on suspected Protestants abroad, and some were even kidnapped and brought back to face the Inquisition. The Inquisition itself became a powerful tool for controlling not just Spanish citizens, but also foreigners living in Spain. Any foreigner, whether a trader, sailor, or scholar, could be accused of heresy and face severe punishment. This fear of outsiders only heightened the country's xenophobia, making Spain a dangerous place for anyone not born there. The Inquisition's reach was vast, and it did not hesitate to burn those it deemed heretics, whether they were Spaniards or foreigners. Despite the Inquisition's efforts, some regions like Catalonia and the Basque Country remained relatively untouched by the Reformation. These areas, with their open borders and frequent contact with France, could have been fertile ground for new ideas, but the people there showed little interest in changing their beliefs. The Inquisition, always looking for threats, often targeted foreigners living in these regions, but it found almost no native heretics. One of the most notable figures in this era was Miguel Servet, a Spanish thinker who dared to challenge the core beliefs of Christianity. His writings on the Trinity and the nature of Christ were so radical that they were banned even in Protestant lands. Servet's journey through Europe, hiding from the authorities, ended tragically when he was captured and burned at the stake in Geneva. His death sparked a debate among intellectuals about the right to dissent and the limits of religious tolerance. Even as the Inquisition worked to keep Spain isolated, the country's connections to the outside world remained strong. Spanish soldiers fought in foreign lands, books were smuggled across the Pyrenees, and ideas continued to flow in and out. Yet, despite all these influences, the Reformation failed to take root in Spain. Some attributed this to the Inquisition's effectiveness, while others saw it as a sign of Spain's deep-seated faith. In the end, Spain's experience during the Reformation is a story of how a nation can resist powerful external forces. For centuries, Spain was seen as a bastion of Catholicism, a country that remained faithful to its traditions even as the world around it changed. But this image, while comforting to many, was not the whole truth. Spain's resistance to the Reformation was as much a product of its own internal dynamics as it was of the Inquisition's efforts. The story of Spain's religious journey is a reminder that the path of history is rarely straightforward, and that the forces of change can be both subtle and profound.